We saw you at the Winter Kingdom when we were at Land's End. We saw you out there.
Oh, yeah, I managed one. I couldn't believe it.
That was a big fish.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a pretty awesome deal. All right. What the heck? We might as well get started. Go ahead. Let's see. All right. Nope, not a rod here.
It's a little.
Yeah, look. There we go. Don't want to blast people. All right, good enough. And I can talk to you guys here anyway, so. All right. Does this thing even help at all?
Yeah, it does.
Oh, okay. Good. All right, so thanks for coming. My name is Rudy Takata, and I grew up in Kenai, Alaska. Moved there when I was 5. Went K through 12 in Kenai. That's why my handle's Cardinal 84. Not because I can't spell, but because the entire town of Kenai can't spell. So graduated as a Cardinal in '84. First of all, I want to thank Alaska Rafting Kayak. This is their seminar slots that they kind of generously let me use to try out this spiel here to see if I can't get more people kayak fishing. They are Hobie dealers, and that's obviously why some of this stuff works. So before we get going, just kind of a brief word from our sponsors. Well, I should point out that I'm not officially affiliated with any of Alaska Rafting Kayak, Cat, or Hobies, but I really use their product, and I think they're really top of the line stuff. So today we'll talk a little bit about why I think you should be interested in kayak fishing. We'll talk a little bit about how to select kayaks, some of the fishing gear. It's pretty much the same thing with just a few exceptions. We'll talk launch considerations. We'll take it up a notch here a little bit and talk specific kayak issues, calendars, and a little bit of research on how you can become a better fisherman. And so let's just jump right in here. So why should you be interested? Well, for me, the number one reason, a lot of folks think it's because it's just economical, it's just one way to get on the ocean. And that certainly is true, but the number one reason is its versatility. I'm fortunate to have a very good job that keeps me busy. I have a family. And more importantly, my friends are the same way. So it's really hard to own a powerboat, which I do, to get a friend to say, hey, let's go fishing. You got to match schedules. But I can now, with one person, put a kayak on top of my Civic, and it replaces my float tube, it replaces my catacraft, it replaces a drift boat, which I've never had the fortune to have, and it replaces a riverboat that I have, and it replaces my 21-foot center console. So the versatility of it is what really makes it work. And of course, economics are important. At purchase, the gear I use and promoting is very kind of on the high-end side. Hobie kayaks, the kayak that I have, the new model, will set you back about $2,800. And then the dry suit, anywhere from $500 to $1,000. So about $4,000 for the top end gear. Now you can get in at a much lower level. You can get paddle kayaks starting right around $500. High end paddle angling kayak will be $1,500 to $1,800. And so anywhere from $1,000 to $4,000 will get you into the game. Now that sounds a little pricey. You have a few different options, but you really make up for it in your ability to fish. Some of my friends have power boats that I lust after, but I cringe when they call me up and say, hey dude, you want to go fishing? And I'm like, oh man, I can catch the same fish for nothing. And when I go with these guys, I'm putting $100, $150 fuel cap and we split it 3 or 4 ways. So for me, one of the places I fish a lot, I live here in Anchorage, is Homer. That's 450-mile round trip. For me, what does it cost? I car top it on my Civic, 450 miles, 30 miles per gallon, 15 gallons, generously call it $3. That's under $50. So You look at trailer fees, you look at launch fees, you look at on-the-water fees, you look at registration, you look at insurance. This kayak fishing thing pays for itself in year one. I'm not the type to brag about exercise because I do absolutely none of it, but before I started the kayaking thing, I was 220 in the wintertime, and now I'm about 190, and in the summer I'll get down to about 170, but the economics do. I've thrown away my Alaska Club membership. I can do this kayak fishing year round. So all this stuff sounds good, but is it kind of a sacrifice? Kind of sort of like the way I consider fly fishing. Not to, I think it's an art, it's difficult, you know, are you sacrificing anything? But you're not. Because of the kayak, I've caught more fish than I ever have in my life. And it really is a product of versatility plus the economics leads to more time on the water. And that, in all my years of fishing, that is the only thing that truly correlates with who's a good fisherman and who's not. I'm sure you guys know how to fish every bit as I do, but unless you're on the water, you don't have a shot. So, you know, these type of discussions, I get a lot of questions. The first is, what's the most dangerous thing about kayak fishing? Without a doubt, it's the drive down. I mean, you're driving down, you're putting in miles. There really isn't anything to be concerned about. These kayaks are very safe. So what's the scariest thing for me on the water? It'd be falling off, of course, but being separated from your kayak. And that's something we'll talk a little bit about here a little bit later. What's the most difficult aspect of kayak fishing? I think a few of you will laugh, but if you think about it, this is the absolute truth. And it's liquid management. It's a fine line between staying hydrated and getting cramped up. And this is the one place, not to sound sexist, I don't know how the women do it. I know several very good kayak anglers that hang with us all day long, and I couldn't do it. Even for the guys, it's something you really need to consider, because even though we have relief zippers and you can eat out on the water, in 3-foot seas, it's something you want to think about. The good news though is I'd say about 80% of the fishing I do, you're within like 15 minutes of the shoreline, so no big deal, but it is something you should consider. When I first started kayak fishing, it was brutal because A, I didn't know how to pee on a kayak, and 2, you know, my morning routine is a pot of coffee, and that's over. I start hydrating the night before, Gatorade, I'll take Rolaids or Tums with me. When you cramp up, those seem to help alleviate the cramps. And once again, you will find that except in the coldest winter months, if you have a dry suit on, you will be hot. But you cannot dress for air temperature. You have to dress for water temperature. All right, so let's talk a little bit about kayak selection. Number one disclaimer, although I sit here as a supposed subject matter expert, I have never been inside a sit-inside kayak except just on a lake, you know, piddling around. But I can tell you this as research. I only know of a handful of good kayak anglers that use sit-inside kayaks. And every one of them were kayak experts first, and then they took on fishing. 99.9% of the fishermen that say, okay, I want to try this kayak platform, use sit-on tops. And there's just a lot of reasons for that. The learning curve is much easier. It's a much safer kayak for kind of solo outings. They tend to be more stable while fishing. Now that's a little different, you know, sit inside your lower center of gravity, but the way they're built, you'll see typically that these are much more stable. Many people, this is an Outback, the one that's also on the showroom floor. Places like in Florida and on lakes, people actually stand on these and cast, so they're that stable. So I guess my point is that if you're looking to get into kayak fishing and you're new at it, I highly recommend going the sit-on top way, unless you have a very specific reason that you would like to use a sit-inside. So once you choose a sit-on top, there's two major differences. One is you paddle them, that's kind of the traditional way, but there's also pedal kayaks, which mine is. and the one you see on the showroom floor. The pedal kayak, I'll just come out and say that you cannot, there's just no way you can overcome the hands-free advantage of a pedal kayak in current, like a river situation, or in a place like Cook Inlet. Just when you're deploying gear, you just don't know if you're tangled up, you can't hold in a spot while deploying, you can't jig over a reef or a hump, you certainly can't back bounce while with a paddle kayak, where I can with my pedal kayak. Now, having said that, the paddle kayaks are much more economical. There are some high-end paddle ones as well. Of course, they're traditional, they're not mechanical, so they're less prone to breakage. And so a paddle kayak is still an excellent platform to get on the water. I would say well over 2/3 of the fishing I do, you could do out of a cardboard box. I mean, you could do this out of a float tube if you could paddle it. But obviously the kayak affords a lot of different advantages. Another selection criteria that you'll be looking at is speed versus stability. Very roughly speaking, this is width versus length, or at least those proportions. The wider the kayak, the more stable it is. The longer the kayak, the faster it is. And typically, and then you need to combine that with transporting. You know, you can't have a 20-foot kayak that's 6 foot wide, then call it a boat, but then the transporting can become an issue. So I would highly recommend that much of the fishing is done close in. When you're starting out, I highly recommend that you go something that's kind of in between, but more on the stable side. Now, when you go to Alaska Raft and Kayak, or if you go to Hobie Kayak and you look up, another really popular kayak is what's called the Pro Angler. It's probably twice as heavy as this one. It's more of a boat. It's a great kayak. Having said that, you won't be dragging it up and down the beach very often. If you got a trailer, you know, you can boat launch it, highly recommend. But if you're gonna car top it or beach launch it, this is about as large of a kayak as you're gonna want. It's probably 80 pounds without any of the accessories. So of course, safety first. I think PFD is absolutely mandatory when you kayak fish. And this is not some safety lecture that you get from the Coast Guard and seatbelt. These kayaks are stable enough that you probably won't ever fall out of them. So for kind of the normal paddling, I don't think you need one. I think a lot of guys in Hawaii don't use one. It says that it restricts their ability to swim. But I can show you several videos where I've caught a halibut, harpooned it, it's taken off, and then the line gets wrapped around my rod holder and that lead comes flying right back around by my head. Now if that lead would have caught me, it wouldn't have mattered if I was Michael Phelps. You know, I would have drowned without a PFD. And so it's those unexpected things that you have to be weary of. And a 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce of lead coming back at you on a big fish, that is plenty to take you out for a sufficient amount of time to make it dangerous. Another topic that's fairly controversial, but it's a little bit easy. I've got something going on in the background here. Is this dry suit issue. If you were to ask me, is a dry suit, man, those things are super expensive. Are they mandatory? The answer is yes. But it's also because I go solo, I fish the wintertime. I let my kids kayak around the lakes with a PFD, no dry suit. Of course, I'm in a dry suit in case something happens. But, you know, you just have to be honest with yourself. If you're coming down a river and you know that, you know, you're always near the bank, you probably don't need one. A chest waders belt is probably sufficient. But just know that we had one time where somebody went out like that with us. They got flipped in the surf at Anchor Point where it breaks 100 yards out. He's, you know, Mr. Stud, so he waves us off, hops in, gets into shore, and oh, he made it, great, well, maybe it is okay. Well, we go running to him, and we get to him, and he's just shivering, and he can't get his heavy, wet clothes on. If we weren't there, they would have found him dead with the truck keys in his pocket because he wouldn't have been able to shed his gear. Maybe he would have had the presence of mind to go get his knife and cut himself out of it, but you know, you gotta respect the cold. Communications, I carry a cell phone and a VHF most of the time. but you must carry one or the other. Signaling, a whistle is a good thing to carry. Of course, a safety flag is always good. A discussion that happens a lot of time is, do you leash or don't leash? And this is on two different levels. One is, do you leash yourself to the kayak or not? I'm starting to think I'm gonna. Although folks will say things like, well, what if a power boat's bearing down on you, you jump, or what if you're coming in on the surf and you get rolled? Now you're attached to this rolling kayak. Okay, I gotta think of the system for that. But once again, the scariest thing for me is that separation distance. You'll be sitting in the same model kayak, holding on to each other, and boom, you let go. And different nets, different body mass, that separation distance, speed is faster than you'll be able to swim. So imagine an empty kayak and a body of the water. If the wind and the current's in the wrong direction, it can get away from you. The other thing is, do you leash your gear or don't you leash your gear? I don't leash my gear. There's a few reasons for that. I'd like to think I'm responsible enough. I've lost 3 rod and reel sets, so perhaps that's not true. But I just don't like the way it gets in the way, and I just understand that I may be sacrificing gear. Another thing though is, if you do choose to I do leash my gear when I'm coming in for like surf landings and things like that where I could flip. But if you do leash your gear, like your rods, try to stay away from the elastic stuff. I've seen people lose their rod, gear, the rod goes down, line breaks, and the rod comes flying back like a missile at you. So just be aware that that can happen. And finally, on the topic of safety, I should do a whole seminar on this if this was a kayak fishing seminar, and it's self-rescue. The one thing I'll say is practice it. It is easy, but it is not intuitive. What most people do when they come up to a kayak is they'll come up to it and they'll push down like they're at the edge of a swimming pool. Try to lift themselves up, and all that does is flip the kayak. The basic principle is to reach over to the other side, let your legs float up, swim onto the kayak as you're pulling up. So once again, easy but not intuitive. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the rods, reels, some of the fishing gear. Once again, a lot of it is a lot like what we normally use with just a few pointers. So for rods, I have a 12.5-foot kayak, so really the only thing that you need to know is to make sure you can get around the front and the back. So this is a 6'3" Shimano jig stick, like it a lot. Another piece of guidance that I might give is a shorter, faster, stiffer action rod. To me, has been a lot easier and a lot more successful than a longer, slower action rod. And basically, why do you use a slower action rod? It's for that extra give, to protect your line. Well, your kayak already does that for you. And what I'm going to tell you with the reels is you're going to keep your drag light anyways. And so, as the fish comes and you're about to net it, a shorter, stiffer stick, you can imagine controlling something coming into your net with a broomstick is going to be a lot easier than something like a big, long spaghetti noodle. So that's where you're going to lose your fish. I highly recommend shorter, faster action over longer, softer. So with the reels, you can pretty much use anything you like. What you're going to find about kayak fishing is there's no requirement for big equipment. The drag, you just can't apply enough pressure to a fish to use the big international, the big broomstick rods. But I will say this, one of the basic things that was just pounded into my head fishing through the years is don't touch the drag. After the fish is on, don't touch the drag. Well, with kayak fishing, you have to either be able to touch the drag or compensate for it. So I really like the lever drag reels. I use the Release a lot. I like the Avids. They're a little too high maintenance for me. But even though this is capable of 30 pounds of drag, I typically have it set at probably 5-6 pounds. I can crank it up a little bit more, but there's a good reason for that, and it's because kayak fishing, you're doing everything by yourself, and there's a lot of times where your hand's on the rod with just one hand, and you're trying to net it, and if you fished before, you know that's when the fish takes off and things, and I'll show you a video here at the end where had I had it set to 10-12 pounds, I would have just lost the rod. And so you want to keep it light. The kayak will do the work for you. And if you got a star drag, keep it light and thumb down on it. The lever drag, you can obviously do it with the lever. the lines, the more I kayak fish, you know, I love fishing, so I love buying gear and equipment. But the more I kayak fish, almost every piece of gear I have now has 50 or 60 pound, 65 pound Power Pro on it. Whether I'm fishing 5 pound pinks or whether I'm fishing 200, 300 pound, hoping for that monster halibut. Once again, on the light side, you can put a leader on it. On the heavy side, you will never break 60 pound line off a kayak from just breaking. Because once again, you cannot apply that kind of pressure. You will be over the side of the kayak if the fish pulls that hard. And so I'll talk about the problems that are associated with that as well. Terminal tackle, pretty much anything that you use fishing, you can use kayak fishing. The only thing I would say is that you need to keep your leader, the total leader length, under the length of your rod. If it's longer, you know, when you're on a boat, people run some long leaders. When you get it next to the kayak, you're going to be doing, you know, this number trying to net the fish. So keep the total leader length less than your rod length. And that's one of the reasons I like this setup a lot. It alleviates that section of line between sinker and leader, and you can do that for all inline flashers. So that's something I recommend. Landing gear is something we can talk about a little bit. Obviously, I use a net. Net selection is a little interesting. I tend to buy high-end gear. I love fishing, guilty, but kayak fishing don't, because a good landing net is just heavy. That's no good. You're doing it with one hand. A good mesh net is nice and meshed, gentle to the fish. Well, all that does is act like a sail on your kayak. And frankly, at least in the fisheries, it'd be different if you guys did a little more river fishing, and I do have nets for those. But in the salt water, if you net a fish, you killed that fish. I mean, the scales come off of it instantly. So if you're gonna let it go, don't net it. If you net it, so you don't need the fish safe nets. Get the cheapest, lightest net that'll hold up to the cast, and it'll work just as good as the fancy ones. It'll work better than the fancy ones. Another piece of equipment that I use that I really like are these Boca grips. You know, I never liked these. Hey, they're stupid expensive, 200 and some bucks. You can get cheaper ones like from other, but you know, I never liked leaning over the rail trying to catch the fish. Well, you don't do that in kayak fishing. It's right there. And so these work awesome. Now, I put the buoy on my handle like this for a specific reason. It's because I lend out my gear a lot. I don't never put your wrist through that strap. You put your wrist through that strap, you clamp onto a halibut and that thing takes off, you are a goner. You never attach yourself or the kayak to the fish while it's alive. Okay, some launch considerations. The access, I mean, I don't even know why this slide's here, because it's infinite. Anywhere you can walk down to the beach. I launch between the Land's End Hotel and the condos, Whiskey Gulch, Anchor Point, Deep Creek, anywhere you see water, you can launch. Now, the thing that you do need to consider is where the surf breaks, especially only in saltwater, I guess, unless you're an extreme laker. But Anchor Point, the surf breaks about 100 yards out because it's super shallow. Now that means the only time you will get dumped in kayak fishing, barring some crazy accident, and this will happen to you, is coming in on surf or launching in surf. So Anchor Point, it breaks further out, so if you flip, okay, you flip into water, you'll probably live that moment. You won't get hurt, but you might die. Whiskey Gulch, the surf breaks right onto the beach. So you might get pounded into the beach, you might get hurt, but you'll probably live. So I mean, I think that's just kind of an extreme way to look at it. It is definitely not that dangerous. The folks on the West Coast do wear helmets though coming in because they have much bigger surf. But being able to read the break and access of the surf will help you get out safely. 90% of the time it's not an issue. One of the prime areas to fish out of a kayak is going to be Cook Inlet. This is one place that you really need to know how to read the current. The current there can be about 5 knots. You really need to get some experience there. But the one piece of advice that I would give that was new to me, even though I thought that, I was this great fisherman, is that book high tide does not equal slack high tide. What? You know, they've always been the same, right? We've used those interchangeably. Well, it's not true. If you look at anchor point, and you look at the tide, and let's say it's at noon, a mile offshore or even a half mile offshore, the current will not stop for probably a full hour later. So know that, keep that in mind, use that in your calculation. So, okay, so now 1 o'clock, it finally turns, you're coming back up north. Well, we had a situation where a 10-knot wind kicked up. And that's, you know, we're going, there's no way, you know, the currents are definitely going to bring us up. Without any keel or really any appreciable boat mass in the water, that 10-knot wind stopped us dead in our tracks. And it would be okay if we were in kayaks that were designed to go miles, because we were about 4 miles from launch, but we weren't. My friend was in an inflatable, I was in a small 9-foot mini-ax. We couldn't do it. So we went to shore, walked 2-3 miles. So it ended up to being a good story, but it was a good lesson learned. So you do need to get out there and judge for yourself, because different kayaks will be affected differently by the wind. And then finally, you will become an expert weather forecaster. But I will say that the marine weather, there's a spot marine weather where you click on a map and it gives you this little small square. That has been amazingly accurate for the areas I fish. So I recommend you look that up. It's the National Weather NOAA site. So, okay, so just very quickly here, Kayak Fishing 201, a little step up. A lot of these things are obvious, but they're the mistakes that even we make that cause things like falling overboard. Number one is side saddling. That's simply doing this. These kayaks are so stable, you can flip your legs over the side. In fact, that is the accepted way to reach for the gear and back. You have all this nice storage space in back, and everybody just intuitively thinks this is what you do. And now if you're flexible, that's okay. But what most people will do is, you know, they'll lean over this way, and this probably is the major cause of people falling off their kayak, being silly. So to reach for anything behind you, side saddle. The leader lane. This is the second reason why I've seen people fall overboard, or you either hear the stories. Once again, you want to keep the length of the leader less than your rod. Once again, what's the net your fish? But one of the things that I do it all the time. You're going to say, I don't do this. But you know, you reel your gear in, boom, there it is. Okay. And I've seen people fall over. What's the solution? Let line out. Okay, but I'm telling you, keep it in the back of your mind, because I've seen people, veterans, fall out doing that when they're in a hurry. Okay, the breakaway section is what I was talking about with using the 65-pound braid. You cannot break 65-pound braid. I would say I can comfortably break 30-pound mono. Braid's a little easier. Mono's got more give. And so, what does that mean? You're floating along, boink, you snag up. If you have a paddle kayak, you're kind of screwed. You just have to hold on. With a pedal one, you could at least paddle, reel, but you got to be able to break it off, or you're going to use that line. So the choice is, do you break off 100 feet, 200 feet, are you fishing 300 feet down, or do you have a section that you can comfortably break off? And once again, you don't have to worry about fishing for 200-pound halibut with 20-pound braid on mono shark section, because you will never apply that kind of force onto the fish. Anything over 20 to 30 pounds is strictly for like abrasion resistance or ease of handling. I mean, you would have to be the Hulk plus some gymnast, gold medalist gymnast on a balance beam to apply more pressure than, say, 20, 30 pounds. Netting, just very quickly, once again, we talked about getting the cheaper nets. I think that those work better, but of course, if you were to ask anybody, show me how to net a fish, and that's what it would be. But in kayak fishing, it's different. Once again, since you only have one arm, net goes out, you lead the fish into the net so that you move the fish, not the net. And also you want to try to keep it in front of you. And one of the things that I would point out is that when you rig your kayak with rod holders, fish finders, rig everything on one side, and the side that you're not going to net on. And that way, A, you have a clear side to re-enter from, and B, you have a clear side to net from. Anchoring techniques, I'll just simply say don't do it. There are methods for it. There are folks in the Columbia River that do sturgeon fishing, that buoy, anchor, clip on, clip off. You could do it. There are ways. I don't, and I'm not going to recommend it. And a lot of it is that even if you do the buoy method in a place like Cook Inlet, I might have to come back next week to get that buoy, depending on where the fish takes me. So, especially with the pedal kayak, you can emulate anchoring by lowering your gear and just paddling in place. And that is A, safer, B, better exercise. But C, I think that distributes the scent field even better and is a very effective technique. So would avoid anchoring unless you're very experienced. And then I would close with just saying that what I've been amazed about with this kayak fishing is try different techniques. Everything seems to work on it. The power mooching, you troll, stop, let your gear down. Once it kind of gets near the bottom, troll again. I catch halibut kings, jigging, mooching, where everybody's trolling. One of the beauties of kayak fishing is that a lot of things you don't use on a boat because you don't want to throttle back and forth. You've got 6 lines in the water. You can't turn quick. Those are all advantages that a kayak in a single line doesn't have to deal with. So come up with new techniques and think outside the box, and I think it'll pay off for you. My annual calendar, I think I'll just suffice it to say that this has been a year-round venture to me. I used to be a very passionate ice fisherman. I went ice fishing once this year. Right now I'm on this little personal streak I've got going where starting September of 2014, I've caught a king salmon off my kayak every month through the month of March. And so, what am I doing here? It's April, I gotta go catch my April king. But it really truly is a year-round fishery. Come the spring, the halibut start coming in, the kingfish stays good. July through August, the halibut, cohos, and trout. Even September through December, this is prime time for king. Who would have thought it? I grew up in Kenai, but I've caught dozens of king during this time period in open water. It's insane. So, if you subscribe to my YouTube videos or go to some of the websites I talk about, you'll see when we're doing this. And what I'd love to see is for you guys to get out and start contributing to some of this information flow, because it is such a new sport. Nobody can say that they're an expert on it. I've heard that to be an expert, you need 10,000 hours or something. I don't have 1,000 hours on my kayak yet.
Have you seen that? There's another guy named Rudy down in California that does the Hobies.
Yeah.
I think it's Halibou 77.
He is, and he's had a bunch of his YouTube videos taken down because of copyright thing.
Oh,
but he's
really?
one of the people that really got me into the video making.
Yeah, he's good.
And he has some awesome stuff. He uses an Adventure Island.
Yeah.
That's a trimaran with a big sail. So yeah, that is awesome stuff. So really though, there's no way other than to whet your appetite here today. But here's my suggestion, northwestkayakAnglers.com. The best kayakers in the Pacific Northwest call this site home. It's where I've learned a lot of my cold water techniques. yakangler.com, I'm a pro staffer for that website. They're much more of a larger national site, and they're good for general topics. Of course, the Alaska Outdoors Directory Forums is where I steal all my good information from. Mr. Strahan sitting right there. I want to thank him for all that. And also the NOAA sites. There's just a lot of good sites out there that you can research. But if you go to these sites, you can be led to other sites and ask the questions at all of them, and a lot of good folks there. So just a lot of information that there's just no way that an hour seminar could do justice for. So Let me just close by saying that in my Northwest Kayak Anglers group, there's kind of two big splinter groups right now. One's trying to do spear fishing off their kayaks. It's kind of a thing from Southern California, and they want to come do it here in shallow water halibut. That's fun. But another bigger group is that they're finding some huge success waterfowl. They're getting into areas where boats can't, where they can't walk into. A couple of these guys are doing so well, they've ditched their shotguns and now are bow and arrowing it, because these Hobies are so effective in getting into areas that ducks haven't been shot at.
What about, is anybody bow fishing with their kayaks? Bow fishing with their kayaks?
The Yak Anglers, the more national site, I've heard them doing that for like the Gar and some of the things. So yeah, I bet you that's something that could be done here for pike. Okay, I might have to do that. So let's see here, what's the time? Wow, we got all sorts of time. So, you know, I'll go ahead and take questions, and then what I'd like to do is maybe show a few videos where I talk, where I can show you what I was talking about on a few of the points. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
What did you say your 12-foot, 36-inch beam?
Probably 80 pounds dry, no rod holders, no anything. So it's probably close to 100 pounds when I'm coming off the beach with it.
You got launch wheels though.
I have launch wheels. Yeah, those help immensely. Okay, well, you know.
Do you have any issues with wrapping the line around your flipper fins, your Hobie fins?
I've probably lost 2 fish in my life. Silver's running through under there, and it is true, but you can get them to sit up right up against the hull, so as soon as the fish comes on, you have to separate the pedals, it comes up.
How far do you generally fish offshore?
Average distance offshore, 200 yards. No, it's way close. And even when I'm traveling, a lot of times it's the coastline. And so probably the consistently that I go out furthest is off the spin to the green buoy. That's a mile. Really no need to go any further.
Yeah.
And here, there'll be some good points here. So I appreciate you guys putting up with the rookie PowerPoint stuff. Always more fun watching videos. Okay, so let's see. We'll talk a little bit about why we do that drag the way I do. Okay, so right here, you can see that I'm reaching for my net, and when this fish takes off, if I had 9-10 pounds of drag, I could have said, say bye-bye to my girlfriend's Abbott, which she would have been pissed off about, and my Seeker rod. So, I mean, just things happen, so keep it light. You're not in a hurry. There's zero reason to pressure a fish. The kayak will move toward the fish, or the fish will come to you. You can see, so that's how you net a fish. Now this next sequence is how not to net a fish. And so basically what happens is you just can't have the net behind you. You don't get leverage up, so you want to keep everything in front of you and off to the side. And I know this, and I still do it. So it drifts behind me, and now you can't pull your net up. And the fish touches the net, and it's gone. Had I been using 2 hooks instead of a spoon, that fish would be off. And I'm an idiot, and I do it again here. So the fish is coming in, and I should just stop right there. And I don't, because I'm greedy. And you just can't get it. And then the next time you'll see that it comes out in front. I don't chase it. Try to turn it out in front of you, guide it into the net. So that's kind of a lesson.
So your key point is have it out front, towards the front of you then?
Yeah, this, you know, the kayak, you want to be this way. You can't, if you start netting the fish behind you, you won't be able to. And it's just as much balance. If you're standing here, you're like, well, yeah, I can. You just can't. I don't know why. I've got all sorts of videos that show where that's the fail point when it comes past perpendicular.
Rudy.
Yes, sir.
I noticed that your paddle is on the side that you're landing fish. Would it be better to have it on the other side?
Yes, it would be much better to put it on the other side. But I will cop to why it's this way. It's because I like to have the Hobie logos there to help promote the Hobie. But absolutely, get all your gear on the other side. Okay, let's see, 645 big halibut. This is a good lesson in not tethering equipment. So this is my 105-pound halibut. This is basically a medium heavy trevally, same setup with an Avid SX. And so when you the way you hold the harpoon is you got to make sure that rope's not going to wrap around you. So don't have the rope. I guess you're holding it like, this, not like this. And then when the buoy comes up, once again, you have to be absolutely careful that you don't get anything caught up in your line. These things are dangerous. But having said that, people ask, do you use guns? And you don't. And the more I kayak fish, I kind of wonder where that practice came from. It's got to be where they're trying to boat, 12 fish on a single tide. Because once they're on a buoy, you bring them up, you keep them close, you gill them with a knife, cut the gills, and if you hang them on a buoy for 3 to 5 minutes, I've yet to see one come anywhere near coming back to life. But so here, you're always trying to hold it in a way that it's not wrapped around in your hands. Here, this could have been ugly if this caught anywhere near my kayak. And you can see that that's my major concern as I'm holding it, is to making sure that I don't have anything wrapped. That's 30 pounds of flotation that I took under for the second time. In fact, the power of these fish are impressive. The next fish you'll see is a 65-pound halibut that my buddy's about to hit here. He's using an A2 buoy. That's 70 pounds of flotation. And he's got 10 pounds of drag. So 80 pounds that halibut's pulling against and keeping it underwater. You do not want to be attached to that buoy. I will say this, if you're looking at picking buoys, the A2 buoy is too big. It tore huge gashes in the fish, the wire did. So I would stick with an A0 or an A1. It had plenty of lift to lift a 100-pound halibut.
How does that buoy work? You're spearing it and inserting the buoy at the same time?
There's a harpoon tip that's steel leader, clevis to a rope and a buoy. Okay. So you hit it with the stick, the harpoon head is embedded on the other side, okay. Kind of goes through.
So you got the rope and the buoy in the water before you spear?
Absolutely. A couple times I haven't.
You get some dangerous stuff there.
Well, I've kind of, because it does get in the way.
And how long is the rope?
I try to, mine's about 4 feet.
Only about 4 feet?
Yeah.
So it's not getting down very deep?
Well, it's getting down wherever the halibut's taking it.
It'll pull it down temporarily.
That might pull it down 30, 40 seconds.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so my 50-pounder pulled it down for probably 15 seconds. In A1, it will pull it down. And an average life vest, the flotation on that's like 20 pounds. So,
and will it get quite a ways away from you then? Or?
Some will run down, some will run out. But anything over about 40 pounds, 30 pounds, just on the safe side, if I'm going to keep it, I harpoon it.
They're over halfway worn out by that point. By the time
and then it's so much easier to control when I'm cleaning it. Once I cut it, I want it back in the water. It's on a big rope instead of on my line or net.
When you catch a fish like that, do you pretty much take it in right away, or do you do you continue fishing?
No, I'll fish. I mean, and it depends on the weather. I'll try to carry a burlap bag, ice or something. That 100-pounder I had to tow it in to shore, but then once I was on shore, I could strap it to the back of my kayak, made it the rest of the 2 miles back. But You can put fish on the inside. You could, you could soft bags on the outside.
Are you worried at all about predators coming after that?
You know, they are everywhere other than Alaska. I've seen the orca videos.
Yeah.
I'd love to see something like that happen close up in a kayak. I'm scared of sea lions, the big bulls especially. They've definitely come, right up to the kayak, and you're kind of wondering, I hope that doesn't think it's his log or something, But here, no. But yeah, you do need to be careful. I've thought about it a couple times in my videos where I'm landing salmon between my legs and thinking, I hope a salmon shark doesn't come flying up through here, or a sea lion. So, something to think about. I'm not worried about it. Maybe I should be.
I talked to a guy yesterday from the Coast Guard, and they had some pretty bad experiences with sea lions. The guy called them the brown bears of the ocean. They have no fear.
Yeah. And I haven't heard it here, but my friends on the Columbia River, they use big tackle for kings because it's the instant the fish is on, it's a race either to the kayak or to the sea lion. So, but I guess I'll just end it with this is, I think, the biggest concern people have is the safety of it. I take my son out, my girlfriend goes out. I've got videos from last year where two new folks that have never done it have gone out. It really is safe as long as you just be honest with yourself about your abilities and make sure you have the right equipment. To be able to do this on this kind of platform, I mean, it's completely revolutionized the way I've looked at fishing. So, the same videos running down an Alaska Rapid Kayak, and they do have one older model out back down there. So, anyway, thank you for coming on Easter. I appreciate it.